And here on DawgNation, happy to bring in from the SEC Network, and of course, as we know him, the great former Georgia Bulldog, Benjamin Watson, here today. Thanks so much for your time, and hope you're enjoying SEC Media Days.
I'm enjoying it. It's good to sit down with you and talk some football.
Yeah, what's interesting to me about this event, especially these days, is it's almost like you've got like two pillars of conversation going. On the one hand, people are as excited about the games as ever, and we're certainly in that category. And there's also this other thing that goes on, and you see this as like Commissioner Greg Sankey walks around and some of the other media types with sort of the confusion about what the next phase of the sport's going to look like.
Yeah.
It's interesting to watch, I would say, both of those conversations happening at the same time.
Well, you talk about the business of football.
Yeah.
One of the things you learn as a player and even going through the NFL is that there's football, yes, there's the X's and O's, but then there's also the business of football, and college football is no different. When you talk about the different conferences and whether we're going to go to 8 or 9 games in the SEC or what the playoff expansion is going to look like in a couple of years in 2026 and 27, those seem like higher echelon conversations, but they impact everybody. And so there's a vested interest in knowing that, but the excitement, I think, for the fans, they just want to make sure that there's still football.
That's right.
And they want to know how their team is going to do, and they want to have exciting, compelling football games. And as I look back over the last season, we've had a lot of those games. All the business side of it, the expansion, I think has been a good thing for college football, not a detriment.
What did you make of Georgia's appearance here on Tuesday? I thought the most interesting part of that was obviously the introduction, kind of the rest of the league, of Gunnar Stockton, the guy that we believe is going to be the Georgia starting quarterback. It seemed like that went really well. Gunner's pretty mild-mannered, but he certainly has no shortage of confidence, and it seems like Kirby's got plenty of confidence in him. What did you make of the Georgia appearance overall?
Well, I thought it was rather understated.
Yeah.
This is the defending SEC champions. And I'm not expecting a ticker tape parade or bells and whistles or anything, but Georgia's not being talked about in that way. I would also say I think Alabama's going to be really, really good this year too. They're not being talked about. And so the questions, we had Kirby on set and we asked him some questions just about the offseason, about Gunner, about just this idea of, being overhyped versus underhyped. I think Georgia is in a unique position where they've had so much sustained success that anything outside of lights out, blowing people out, people look at them like, are they taking a step back? So it'll be interesting to see with Gunner. I like what I see from him. I like the intangibles that he has. I even like, the way he speaks, the way his teammates speak about him. So excited to see how he develops as a quarterback, specifically over that first part of the season for this offense.
So I totally agree with you. It seems like, and we joke about this all the time, Georgia beat Texas twice a year ago, and it seems like Georgia's still sort of fighting to get the credit they deserve for that. But on the other hand, we talk to Georgia fans every day, and if you want to go back to the early part of the calendar year, back in the winter when the loss to Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl was still fresh on people's mind, boy, there was a lot of criticism of what they felt like was offensive regression. A guy that you know well, Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator, was kind of in the spotlight on some of that. Really, there wasn't that much of that I think has come up this week, but when you want to go back to a time a couple of months ago when that was a really hot discussion, Paul Feinbaum kind of led the way on some of that. How much of that criticism of Coach Bobo and whatever Georgia was or wasn't offensively, how much of that do you think was fair?
Well, I think there's enough criticism to go around. I think a lot of it is fair because that's how we operate. When things don't go right offensively, when there's inconsistency, even when there's dropped passes, Coach Bobo isn't out there trying to catch passes. He's not the one dropping passes, but it all comes back on the coaching staff because it's where's the disconnect? What are you not teaching well? What are we not doing in practice to improve these sorts of things? So when you see the same problems over and over again, then many times it falls back on the coaching staff. Look, somebody brought up a good point earlier about offensive coordinators that coach for defensive coaches and how many times they are, and I'm not saying this is the case, but as I look at this situation, including my experience playing in the NFL and playing for some defensive coaches versus offensive coaches, a lot of times the offenses that play under defensive coaches are minimized. They're constrained in a bit. And so I do think, look, there's a lot to go around. I think some of that was Carson Beck last year. Look, let's be honest. When it comes to the Sugar Bowl, we're going out there, Georgia's going out there with a quarterback that hadn't really played.
Right.
He hadn't game planned before. So there was a lot to be desired there. I think we know moving forward what it's going to be. And I also think that, look, if the head coach has confidence in him, it doesn't mean that nobody can critique but it means that he must see something in Coach Bobo that he wants to win. He wants to win too.
I want to ask you about one of your other former coaches here in a moment. Before that, a year ago, you look at Georgia, once again, very deep at the tight end position and the kind of the aftermath of the Brock Bowers era, but it seemed like it kind of took a while for Carson Beck and Oscar Delp, who was kind of one of the more experienced tight ends a year ago, to sort of get on the same page. And we sort of saw Delp be way more part of the offense kind of like mid-November on than we did through the first 2.5 months of the season.
Yeah.
I guess, how real is that sometimes for whatever reason, quarterback last year is Carson Beck, and a guy like Oscar Delp, who we think is a really important weapon for Georgia this year, that sometimes you're just not on the same page. How real is that?
Sometimes you're not on the same page, but also sometimes people don't understand how good some players are. And I said this over and over again, specifically for Georgia fans, like Brock Bowers was a generational talent.
Yeah.
People sometimes had a nerve to say, how is he going to do in the NFL? I don't think he's going to translate. I'm like, are you serious? Have you watched this dude? What do you mean, how is he going to translate? I said, he's probably going to be one of the best to ever play in the NFL, and that's what he's turning out to be. I said the same thing about Ladd McConkey, watching them play. And so sometimes we don't appreciate what we have, and we don't appreciate the greatness of certain players because they make it look easy. And then when the next players behind them don't do the same thing, we immediately think there's something wrong with them or something wrong with the coach and those sorts of things. And so, look, Oscar Delp, I think he's made tremendous strides. From a physical standpoint, watching him block, he gained more weight. He got stronger over the last couple of years. When he first came in, he didn't have the girth or the strength to play on the line of scrimmage. He's at that point now. But he's not Brock Bowers. But he has to know that he doesn't have to be. And also what happens with offense is sometimes when you have great players, and this is where offensive coordinators, whether it's Bobo or others, have to be careful. They have to be careful when they have great players at certain positions. They rely on those players' individual ability to make plays and forget that they need to be sure to design plays and scheme plays for other players and not just rely on that player. Because when those players leave, you can't just simply rely on that position because that player is not there. That's when you know you're a great offensive coordinator, when you realize where your talent's gone in that position, but you can then maneuver and strategically place other players in positions to be successful.
I think that's a fascinating answer. All right, let me finish with this. Yeah. Obviously, you won a Super Bowl with Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots, very important part of that franchise. And now Belichick is in college. Now, all-time great NFL coach, he may be truly the GOAT. But is it a good fit in college football for Belichick at this stage of his career?
I don't know, bro. I'm going to be honest with you. I'll be honest. I was surprised. I was really surprised. And I know Bill, but I don't know Bill. I do know that there's an allegiance or an affinity for North Carolina. He has history there. This is perhaps a legacy play for himself, for his sons that are coaching with him. There's all these other things. I was surprised that he decided to go to college to come coach. And I'm even more surprised at all the other things surrounding him with his personal relationships with female, with his girlfriend, and how that's playing out. It seems he is doing all the things he told us not to do. That's what's confusing me about the whole situation. But I'll tell you this. He knows how to win. He knows how to create a structure that is professional, that has high accountability. And if you want to be successful, success doesn't just happen because of talent. It happens because of a process. Coach Belichick knows how to establish a process and hold himself and others to it.
We're big fans of yours, Benjamin Watson.
Yeah.
For people who want more of you, either on the SEC Network, author, speaking, everything else, how can they find more of you?
Find me on Twitter/X, Benjamin S. Watson. Same thing on Instagram, Facebook. I'm on all those sorts of things. We have a website called thewatson7.com. You can find us there. And I'll actually be releasing a podcast myself pretty soon.
Oh, congratulations. That's
awesome. In about a month in September. It's called The Just Life.
Okay.
It's based on Micah 6:8, about doing justice, loving kindness. And in my podcast, I'm interviewing in person people who are engaged with different justice issues, trying to teach all of us how to treat people more fairly and equitably across a bunch of different issues, whether it's abuse or whether it's religious persecution or race in America, faith, all those sorts of things. So The Just Life is kind of my pet project that'll be coming out in September.
Sounds incredible. And, of course, this fall on the SEC Network. We can't wait for the season to be here. Benjamin Watson, we appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.